I sense there's a lot of excitement in the room. Just to get started, but still I'd like to offer a couple of opening remarks. I'll try to be very brief as I can at this point. But I feel it's necessary to situate this gathering in the context of the project Former West, and perhaps to also outline a few key questions that prompted us to embark on this admittedly challenging undertaking. So what is Former West? Let me first answer pragmatically, so to speak. As many of you know, Former West is a 5-year research project stemming from the field of contemporary art. It is realized in the interconnections of a number of art and academic institutions, mainly in Europe, which are entangled together through their commitment to exploring art's fundamental relationship to political imagination. This effort involves an ever-growing network, and I would need much more time than what I have at my disposal to name them all, but to be more concrete, it includes partner institutions as varied as museums, Museo Nacional Centre d'Art Reina Sofia Madrid, Muzeum Sztuki Nowoczesne Warsaw, an art academy, Academie der Bildende Künste in Vienna, universities, University Utrecht and our host, Istanbul Technical University, a research and publishing organization, After All Journal and Books in London, a forum for world cultures, Haus der Kultur der Welt in Berlin, and a contemporary art center, BAC, among many, many others. And I thank all colleagues and friends from these institutions who are here with us. In this dynamic space of collaboration, each institution contributes its knowledge, expertise, publics, in order to negotiate possible new narratives, or perhaps even counter-narratives about our contemporaneity, which unfold across research exhibitions, expert meetings, seminars, conferences, and various publications. Importantly, there is also a group of individual researchers connected to the project, including critics, theorists, and curators such as Marion von Osten, Georg Schollhammer, Simon Scheik, as mentioned already, Tom Hollert, Claire Bishop, Boris Groys, and Piotr Piotrowski, many of whom are with us here today. They are developing research strands from within their own perspectives and fields of expertise in order to bring their concerns to bear on the key aspects, key topics of Former West. If the field of inquiry Former West engages with is expansive and the structure of activity is rather complex, it must be clear by now that project research is envisioned as a multi-part nexus of various formats of artistic and intellectual inquiry. One could point to 3 main activities that structure it. First, the annual research congresses, as this one, second, Former West Research Congress, take place in different culture and political contexts each time and function as a synthetic platforms in which various research themes are brought together and put under discussion and negotiation. The second such activity is the Former West exhibition, an international group show that will open in Berlin in 2013 and will later travel to Utrecht. And thirdly, a major publication synthesizing the full scope of the project's research and its future-oriented speculations, which will be released at the end of the project in fall 2013. These activities are curated by Katrin Romberg, Vienna-based curator, Charles Esche, curator and writer, director of Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven, and myself. The artistic team could not do without the contributions of curator Cosmin Kostinash, curator of publications Jill Winder, and curator of research Vivian Rehberg. But all right, what do we mean by Former West? Now, before attempting to answer, really, I need to acknowledge that we find ourselves in the midst of the research, and it would be premature, if not even irresponsible of me, to pretend I can draw any firm conclusions. It has become clear to us that although the term Former West carries in itself an immense simplicity that seems to communicate content at an instant, we constantly, but really constantly reminded with every new question appearing before us that just below the surface of this concept there's enormous complexity. Thus, my remarks about what we might mean by formalism will merely outline the dilemmas and directions in our thinking, which I believe can be productive for a gathering like this one. So in order to begin, we need to remind ourselves of the year 1989, the project's starting point, and of course of the immense changes it brought about for the world at large. The fall of the Berlin Wall is the most spectacular event of 1989, undoubtedly, and stands to this day as a symbol of the dramatic breaking point that ushered in another future. With it came the end of communist rule in what was called the Soviet bloc in the decades before, an event that goes into history customarily interpreted as a victory of the so-called West over the only existing competing ideological system. Yet it might be that these events actually signal the West's defeat, because even as the geopolitical structure of the Cold War fell away, the West stubbornly clung to its hegemony, which has had devastating effects up until today. Of course, it is clear that the true history-making significance of 1989 lies in the end of the Cold War, and thus the assumed end of the three partitioning of the world into what we used to know as the first, second, and a third world. Now, I know all dates are conventional, but I think I do not need to tell you that 1989 is much less so. From the Tiananmen Square massacre in China, to the death of Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran, to the fatwa issued against Salman Rushdie, to the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Afghanistan and of Cuban troops from Angola, to Namibia's independence, to the meeting between Mandela and de Klerk in South Africa that led to the end of apartheid, and to the airing of the first reality TV show. These and clearly many, many, many more events function as a catalyst of the processes all around the world that could perhaps be understood as the processes of synchronization, of bringing the clocks together, so to speak, all around the world. It is also a moment, as Alex Albero has argued in a conference just a week ago, when fine art emerges into what we today call contemporary art, an ensemble of practices that parallels and partakes in the major new formations in the world. These forces include the transnational processes of globalization and neoliberalism, which impact, of course, literally every field of our activity and existence, not only in terms of economic interconnectedness, but also in the globe-spanning meshing of cultures and communities and the new questions around migrations and citizenship that it raises. Secondly, the notion of the so-called return of religion and the rise of religious extremism and Islam's post-9/11 succession as the enemy previously represented by communism. And thirdly, the impact of technology, mainly the internet. Interestingly, the World Wide Web was launched in 1989. Contemporary art iconographically exposes this new order of things. Thematically in works of art, of course, think about the abundance of artworks dealing with migration or religion, to name but few, and through large-scale global perennial exhibitions like the biennials, which in their own way mirror the global circulation of commodities and the production of new markets. It offers a stage for narratives in a renewed research of search for beauty and autonomy, as we know, besides providing this battleground for politicized counter-narratives of outer globalization. The question remains, however, to what extent these battles actually contribute to the political struggles of the day. Yet, despite 1989 marking the historical moment of the end of three blocs, and despite these fundamentally changed conditions within which artistic and cultural labor take place, the so-called West, blinded by the global march of its neoliberal capitalist orthodoxy, has remained thinking and acting, both internally and while on its global mission as the first among the worlds. Having failed to recognize the impact of the massive shifts put in motion by the end of the Cold War on itself, the West continued to adhere to its own claims of hegemony. And just to avoid any misunderstanding, by the West, I mean that West which was configured out of the post-World War II context. It is important to realize that there are different conceptions of the West possible, but what we speak about is that West, largely synonymous with the first world of Cold War rhetoric. Therefore, it is crucial to underline that we are not suggesting however attractive a prospect that would be. We're not suggesting that the West is already former. Far from it. Many would rightly argue that today we are faced with quite the opposite, a resurgent West, as Paul Gilroy has called it, waging wars around the world with unprecedented vigor, or others would point to the West as a relentless engine for the expanding reach of neoliberal doctrines. So let me be clear once and for all, in our understanding, former West is not a thesis, it's not a statement, but it's a proposition and a process. Thus the question we pose to ourselves is, what if we imagined the West as being former after 1989? What if, using a retro perspective approach, to dust off a term of Catherine David from Documenta 10, what if we at once looked back on the past 20-odd years with former West spectacles, as it were, to reread contemporary art developments in the social and political context in a different way than we have done so until today, and at the same time speculate how from this new body of knowledge another future can emerge. Former West is a speculative term, a problematizing device, which we conceived as a tool to help us to try to come to terms with the contemporary. Let's not forget that former does not mean the end to a condition, nor does it exclusively mean past. The former condition seems meaningful because it still has some power over the imagination in the present and holds within its space to engage critically with both the West's problematic but also its positive aspects. It's true that in a rather seductive way, former West offers itself for interpretation as a mirror of another term, that of the former East. Yet let's not be fooled by the appearances invoked in a simple rhyme. Former East refers to the post-89 political geography of the former communist bloc, and what it says loud and clear is that communism is no more. Taking the reverse example, we cannot apply such a claim mechanically to the so-called West. There's an even more capitalism around the world, one could argue, and with it the West is increasingly ubiquitous in pockets of what used to be East and South. It is thus clear that simply applying the notion of former West in retrospect onto the period between '89 and today in the territory of what used to be called the First World would only replicate the old notions of oppositions, and in effect would just be a continuation of the bloc mentality which the West itself tries to maintain. I think it would result in the prolongation, if not fortification, of those old divisions. And I hope it's clear that this would run counter to the original critical and emancipatory intentions that ground our discussion. Rather, our efforts could be oriented towards the desirability of producing a former West, even though in practice it might remain unrealized. In other words, as something that sets the limit to representation. Could we actually think of former West as a horizon? It is commonly assumed that the global political and culture changes of 1989 left the world bereft of a sense of politics as striving towards a future, of a horizon as it were, and that we are left with the perpetual caretaking of the existing state of things in an apparent endgame of liberal democracy. Yet, could it not be said that artworks and art exhibitions do set up a horizon, offering a proposal of what can and cannot be imagined? That what we so unproblematically call the artistic imaginary is in fact an indication of this presence of new possibilities that society seems to have resigned from seeking. Isn't the contested term of the horizon, besides being suggestive of political aims or utopias, in fact the very frame of any aesthetic and political project? To posit former West as a horizon within this set of conditions is one of the experiments this Congress seeks to engage in. It would require a thought construction through which the notion of loss, which formerness implies, would become motivational, desirable even for moving forward and towards another future. Coming here from the Netherlands just under a month into the reign of a new government, which gained power only through the support of an extreme right-wing populist party in the ruling coalition, it seems to me that the right is very well aware of this loss of horizon and is not afraid to use it pragmatically for its own ends, with the consent of the disillusioned voters who seem not to care about the future simply because they do not believe they have one themselves. The government has begun an offensive against contemporary art, recently branded as a leftist hobby, by slashing the art and culture budget by almost half and largely disproportionately in comparison with cutbacks in other fields. And what remains is earmarked for the conversation of national heritage, as if we are turning the nation into a museum of the past. In the face of this disturbing alliance of the xenophobic and the neoliberal, and here the Netherlands is an example of much larger picture of where the West finds itself now, a well-known and often repeated refrain comes to mind: what is to be done? And what is to be done in our field of contemporary art? 2 weeks ago, Congress curator Simon Scheik and myself met with a group of culture practitioners here in Istanbul. And by the way, in the airport, I grabbed a recent copy of The Economist that had a special report on Turkey titled, in a question, "Turning Its Back on the West?" Just be calm. The answer of the editors is no. Turkey is not turning its back to the West, but rather it is Europe and America that cannot come to terms with Turkey's success. And I'm sure we will be touching on some of these issues in the next couple of days. But getting back to contemporary art, we had remarkable conversations here about what former West could mean for Istanbul and Turkey, and vice versa. And here it was exactly the notion of contemporary art and its possibility in the current world that was continuously put under pressure. It appeared to me as if the promise of contemporary art held alive in the 1990s, in the immensely politicized artistic and intellectual context of Istanbul, has been thrown in doubt by its very proponents. If back then contemporary art attracted people from various fields into a sort of alternative, even avant-garde alliance, today contemporary art in Istanbul, so as I was told, seems to denote a profession and a business, something incorporated into an institutional infrastructure established in record time as a matter of bourgeois prestige. This critique does not sound unfamiliar to me or the context in which I work, as one struggles in daily work not only with the constant reabsorption of political practices into market logic, but also with the urgent questions how the incredibly rich political discussions we have amongst ourselves could find their way into broader public discourse. Yet, if we want to see the system we are part of today, which seems to rule our imagination in the field of contemporary art, replaced, and it will be, as many thinkers such as Immanuel Wallerstein remind us, this change will be the result of a long political struggle in which every input matters. If we still believe, and I do, that contemporary art carries in itself the possibility of another world, of another future, rest assured it will not happen only because it is possible. It will require a lot of imaginative and real gestures, and I invite you to join my hope that this second Former West Congress on Horizons can become an opportunity for some of them to be articulated. Thank you very much, and